Well, we're in the home stretch of this lecture series, and before I wrap things up and tell you how I dealt with my qualitative research skeptic, of course, I just want to take a few moments to talk about the balance of theory and practice in marketing research, because we still need to discuss that original point that I brought up back in the first lecture, that marketing research can resemble pseudoscience if we're not careful. I think it's important for us to remember that we are all qualitative researchers by nature. And let's think about this for a moment in terms of how we make decisions. Imagine that you're taking an impromptu vacation to Europe and you're trying to decide where to go. Now, are you going to make that decision quantitatively or qualitatively? You might think at first quantitatively, because what you might do is you might look at the cost of the trip or how much time you're going to be able to spend there, or any number of things that have to do with an analysis of the numbers available to you. But chances are good what you're really ultimately going to slide back to is a more qualitatively informed decision. You're going to start thinking about things like, that sounds too expensive, or I don't know anybody there, or this country has the best wine. This country doesn't have anybody that I care to know. I'm afraid they won't speak my language there. I love the culture there. It's dangerous there. So many other things on down the line. The decisions that you're going to make are going to be based more on your own experience and on anecdotes that you've heard, not on quantitative reasoning. This, after all, is how we tend to make decisions about almost everything in our personal lives. We are all qualitative researchers by nature, but our education has taught us to be quantitative researchers by training. And I don't just mean MBA and MMR students here at SIUE. I mean everybody from a very early age. We're taught to rate and rank things and to see ourselves in classifications rather than in a more qualitative understanding of ourselves as individuals. Children are taught to see their peers by classifications like gender, age level, and in-class performance. Teenagers tend to focus on what the cliques around them do. Adults tend to make judgments based on socioeconomic characteristics like social class or address or race. And we're all taught to measure the value of our time in monetary terms, to value the sale price of our cars and how many miles they have on them, to value the products we buy in terms of how much money we spend on them. These are quantitative ideas forced on us, taught to us to help make our lives simpler. Quantitative data make assumptions about things, package them up neatly, make it easy to draw numerical comparisons, and give us some ability to reduce the amount of information that we have to process. Here on this slide, I have some of the everyday data we collect and consume. And with qualitative data, we'll make very qualitative assessments about things. We might have debates or examine debates. We might listen to personal stories. We might turn to more social media, whether those are very traditional, like just word of mouth, or more internet-based. We might look at forms of creative expression. We might even just consider an emotional response to things. But when we are looking at things quantitatively, we tend to look at things that are a little bit more mechanical. Rankings, costs, gradings, temperatures, prioritizations, thresholds. By the way, a speed limit would be a good example of a threshold. You know quantitatively that there's a certain amount of speed that you're allowed to go before you're at a point where you're risking getting a ticket. That's a threshold. Now, unfortunately, when we're collecting data, our own ways of thinking tend to give us a false sense of security about what we truly know. And it's easy for us to rely on intuition rather than on truly knowing something. If we're well trained in science, however, we really should be focused on looking for evidence to support our knowledge, not just on having an intuitive grasp of facts based on a false sense of security from some decidedly subjective, non-scientific data. And, in my own life, I really try to strive to be scientific about my decision making as much as possible, often by just reviewing the amount of information that's out there and testing my hypotheses against it. And if I really need to test something more strictly, I might design a quasi-experiment or something to try to figure it out. But using the tools of scientific inquiry is good, even for your personal decision making. So here's where I'm going to give you some benefit from my years as a practitioner and in the field of marketing research and as a former MMR student. And also I should mention I got my business degree at SIUE as well. So MBA students, you're in good company too. Because I'm going to level with you right now, and I'm going to say that all of these high-minded ideals that we've been discussing regarding research are acknowledged and often practiced throughout the research industry, but they're often undermined by constant compromises that come from three sources. And those three sources are clients, costs, and time. Now, I'm going to use the word client generically because what I really mean when I'm saying it is end users of marketing research. Because I recognize that the traditional client-based model of producing marketing research is gradually giving way to what we call corporate research, which is where researchers are employed directly by the corporations who are using them, and often that they have a role within that corporation internally. I can say this with some certainty because I've been to many conferences recently, and I found that an increasing number of people in attendance are conducting research as corporate employees rather than as agencies. And it seems like many of my colleagues, whether they came from the MMR program at SIUE or I know them from elsewhere, if they're my age or younger, they're getting jobs as corporate researchers more than they're getting jobs as analysts for dedicated marketing research firms. But I'm still going to use the word clients, regardless of the context, because even in a corporate research setting, corporate researchers are often hired by departments or units within their organization to conduct studies, and the same basic rules apply. So broadly speaking, clients are people who need research, but who don't have the time or training to execute it properly. Our job as marketing researchers is to provide them with solid, trustworthy data that can support decision-making. Often, their desire for information greatly exceeds their budget for it, and clients are known for insisting on compromises that can make good research into bad research. Clients are also known for inserting their own biases into the research process, either in whom they select to participate, how they insist lines of questioning should be asked, or what methods of research they prefer. Say they might want a focus group when in-depth interviews are really what they should be using instead. Clients care about the science of research in the abstract, but they can care much more about their own perceived objectives in the reality of the work. If the research might make them look bad, if it might challenge an idea that they've been championing, or disrupt the system that they benefit from, they're not only likely to challenge it, but they're also likely to become an obstacle to the research, especially if it does something that makes them look foolish in the end. Clients also tend to be far less concerned about the ethics of marketing research because to them, what we do is simply collect information. And then again, that's not to say that they are unethical. It's to say that when we come to them with our ethical concerns about what we can and can't do, it's not as big a deal to them as it is to us. Now, I'm telling you all of this now because I want you to understand that good, well-designed marketing research has to come from the researcher standing firm, not from trying to appease a client. Ask any professional researcher about the compromises that they have to make to appease clients, and they'll tell you, and I've, by the way, found that it's without exception, that they have encountered clients who have tried to taint the research process to manipulate the outcome. Not maliciously, of course, but simply through having a desire to control what the research will ultimately say. Be wary of that and keep yourself educated about and committed to good research practice. Second, you need to know that cost is a major issue for research. Clients often have far more of a nice to know than a need to know outlook, and they will ask for a lot more information than they need and then balk at the cost of obtaining it. Sometimes they commit themselves to engaging in studies and forget to ask for an appropriate budget internally. And so when you come back to them with the actual cost of what it is required to do the research, they don't have the budget for it. Other times, they price professional research against what they perceive to be the bottom price, which is free online surveys, and they decide professional work is too expensive to do correctly. In qualitative research, where costs can be quite high because of the amount of human beings involved in it, clients often want to cut costs with fewer interviews or focus groups, and instead, they want to do much less research than is required to validate their findings, and then they'll start hand-waving the researchers' objections with a statement like, "It's just qualitative, it doesn't matter." Well, it does matter, and these situations are extremely tough to navigate as a researcher. Do you give up on the project just because the budget isn't there to do it right? Or do you hack it together, add in a bunch of mea culpas, and hope it's good enough to be somewhat scientific? Unfortunately, somewhat scientific has a lot of intersection with pseudoscientific, so be careful. Finally, timing is an issue. Clients often want to know information long before it's ready to be presented. Qualitative research is extremely tricky to complete quickly, and even if you put together some focus groups in a day or two using a research panel, it's still going to take you at least a week or two to get a full report ready. Clients like to walk away from quickly completed research with hasty conclusions that support their normative thinking and which ignore the empirical conclusions that your data suggests. They also tend to confuse what was said in the back room or in a meeting as being something that was said in a series of interviews or in a focus group. Beware the need for quick information. Plan studies accordingly. As we'll discuss in this class, method alone requires a lot of time to think about and fine-tune qualitative research. Okay. With all that said, one way we as qualitative researchers can defend ourselves is to study related fields. And I know, you're in graduate school right now, and I'm telling you that there's more studying to do when you're done, and that's enormously frustrating, but I'm going to tell you, I have never stopped studying after I graduated, okay, guys? So here are a few fields that I have found a lot of intersection with what we do in the research field, and qualitative research in particular, that you should definitely continue to pay attention to even after you have graduated, okay? The first are the fields of social psychology, sociology, and anthropology, which are, guess what, where qualitative research originally comes from. These are fields where there are a lot of published data, and they're useful for experimental, statistical, and observational evidence of human behavior and emotion, both at the individual level and at the broader cultural level. And if you read business books, and I've got a bunch laying on my desk here, Freakonomics and Made to Stick, and Malcolm Gladwell books and things like that, a lot of times they refer to research from these fields, sometimes a little too factually for my taste, but they often refer to research from these fields, and you should keep abreast of it. The next field is behavioral economics. Behavioral economics has been getting a lot of play recently with academics like Dan Ariely, who love to talk about irrational behaviors. And I find this field really interesting. And I think if you're going to be a qualitative researcher, this is a field you need to know a lot about, because so much of what we are looking at in qualitative research needs to take into account the irrational behaviors that people have. So just one that I would look into. User experience, also known as UX testing, very commonly used in web design and in software design, but it's a tool very similar to qualitative research that's useful for detailed data gathering of human interactions with a product or service. This is actually a field that evolves separately from qualitative research, but which has a lot of overlap with it. Another field, a little more academic, comes from the field of linguistics, is semiotics, and that's the study of meaning, and it's often broken into three subfields, which are semantics, syntactics, and pragmatics. If you want to become really, really good at words and understanding what people mean, these are three things that you should definitely be looking into: semantics, syntactics, and pragmatics. You will become a master of language. Finally, survey methodology. Now, I didn't know until recently that survey methodology is actually a scientific field of study. I always thought survey methodology was just something that was kind of a practice that we all did. No, it is an actual field, and interestingly, it's a field of study around effective surveying techniques and methods, and much of what's in its literature is often at odds with the conventional approaches of survey research. In fact, I just recently attended a session where I learned about survey methodology, and I was surprised to learn how many bad habits I've developed from my formal training in marketing research. So I would highly encourage you to look into that field as well. With all that said, please understand that I'm not advocating mastery in any of these fields. Rather, I'm taking the time to help you to be aware that they exist, and I want you to know about their fundamentals so that you can understand how they intersect with your work. Not only will it make you a better, more disciplined researcher, but it will also arm you with an amazing set of best practices that you can use to keep your own work more on the side of science than on pseudoscience, and also to ensure that whether you're conducting quantitative research or, as we're going to focus on in the rest of this class, qualitative research, your work is going to be able to stand up to scrutiny and provide a glimpse into the truth the universe has to offer.